They're on, they're off, they're back on again. Donald Trump is threatening tariffs on countries from Canada and Mexico all the way over to China. I'm going to give you a different perspective than the U.S. news cycle that's not pro-Trump, not anti-Trump, but tells you as a U.S. citizen how this is going to actually impact you in a global way. With some of the news about tariffs changing very rapidly, some of the finer points of this may be out of date pretty quickly. But I want you to focus on a much larger macro point that I think everyone else is missing. There's two things I'm going to share with you and how the tariffs could impact you if you're a U.S. citizen. Number one is your wealth, and number two is your freedom and your sort of global reputation. We help people at Nomad Capitalist who want to diversify their assets, they want to live overseas, they want to take advantage of all the world has to offer. And so if you're someone who just says, hey, I live in Wausau, Wisconsin, and I never plan on leaving Wausau, Wisconsin, well, I think that the world, no country operates in a vacuum. Anything that happens will impact you in some way, but you're probably less at risk. Who I'm talking to is someone who wants to make overseas investments for higher returns, wants to protect their assets overseas because they don't trust things like the U.S. court system, and wants to potentially lower their taxes somewhere else or get a second passport as a backup policy. That's who we're talking to. And so we're going to talk about your wealth. We're going to talk about kind of your global reputation and how you can use that for freedom. What do these tariffs do for that? I'm apolitical. I'm no longer a U.S. citizen. Quite frankly, I don't have a dog in this fight other than I have investments. I'm coming to that in a minute. I was really happy to see someone said, I thought this Andrew Henderson guy was some right-winger, but actually he has principles. He stays by the principles. When he thinks Trump's right, he says he's right. When he says Trump's wrong, he says he's wrong. And that's exactly how I feel. This is not about the typical U.S. news cycle of pro-Trump or anti-Trump. That's what I detach myself from. I am politically homeless. I don't have a dog in the fight. Now, let's talk about the first part, and that's your wealth. I overheard somebody here talking about, hey, I voted for Trump, but look at my stock portfolio, it's down. Yeah, U.S. stocks took a beating. Now, I'm a long-term investor. What happens over one day or 1 week or 1 month doesn't really impact me, but no doubt, people lost a bunch of money. That's on top of what happened to stocks like NVIDIA, for example, when they saw, there's actually people in China that can maybe do stuff better than U.S. companies. So in some ways, it hasn't been the best couple of weeks for investors in U.S. markets. I have investments all around the world. I looked at my Mexican investments. They did a lot worse when the new Mexican president was elected than they did. I largely have blue chip stocks. I took the opportunity of the new president to buy more into Mexico because I believe in the future of it. I bought it at a lower peso rate. I think Mexico in the future will be an even better place. But my blue chip stocks really weren't impacted that much on the announcement of these new tariffs. Looked at the Chinese stocks. It's been a pretty good couple of months for the Chinese stocks listed in Hong Kong for the most part. Not a big impact there, again, on blue chip stocks. Maybe some slight losses, maybe some slight gains. Where everybody's gotten crushed is if you own automaker stocks. Those have just fallen out of bed. But it's been a bad year for automaker stocks in the last 12 months or so anyway. Here's what I'll say to why you ought to consider investments overseas. And this is harder to do as an American. My Mexican and Chinese stocks pay much higher dividend yields. And for me, as a non-American living overseas, I pay very low or zero tax on those dividends. So everybody's got to eat. I like those investments as much for the growth potential I see in those countries as I do for the yield, which is much healthier than what I get in the U.S., which allows me to put more of my business money back into my business because I live in part off the passive income. I can do that as a non-American. But here's the point. U.S. stocks got hit. And you think, okay, well, I'm sure all the other markets got Canadian stocks and Mexican stocks, Chinese stocks. Okay, in my case, not so bad. But let's say they took a hit also because they're in the crossfire. What about Georgia? We talked about Georgia. Looked at what's happening there. Yeah, nothing really blinked. What about Cambodia? A place I've been telling you about for as long as I've been here for the last dozen years. What happened there? One of the things that we've talked about a little bit is this idea of detaching yourself from global macroeconomic trends. And you can largely do that in emerging and frontier markets. I invest in a private mutual fund that invests in a lot of frontier market Asian countries, Uzbekistan, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, I think even Iraq. And one of the things they put in their end of year newsletter last year, about a month ago, was with Trump coming in, if he delivers on these tariffs, we think that these various Eastern European, Central Asian, South Asian markets are going to outperform. in part because of domestic growth, which is just the continued play there, but also in part because they're very unreliant on exports. And they were going through the various countries and showing most of these countries don't really export that much of anything yet, let alone to the United States. I mean, what is Uzbekistan sending to the United States? And so for me, the play is you want to be diversified. You want to have diversified investments. If you want to live in the United States, that's fine. And you're going to continue to pay high taxes to live in the United States. No matter how much Trump lowers them, I do not believe there will be a repeal of the income tax. Federal income taxes are still 37% at the top. And you're going to pay that no matter what state you live in. But even if you're going to do that, why not diversify your portfolio to have money in places where the country kind of has nowhere to go but up? Now, there's no investment that always goes up. But if I look at Cambodia, for example, yeah, I think pretty much every year it did go up. Maybe 1 or 2 years, very, very little. But generally speaking, it always goes up in pretty basic, pretty conservative asset classes that didn't always go up in the US and other legacy brand countries. And so for me, when you look at tariffs, part of the investment play, and I'm not an investment advisor, and obviously my situation's mine, you make your own decisions. But for me, just being invested in one country's stocks because it makes you feel good or because that's what you know, that's a route where you're just not going to be as well protected, in my opinion, as if you have investments in various places. And obviously what we help people do is we'll help people get residence permits and citizenships in many countries when they make an investment there, such as in property, or when they buy government bonds, or when they buy various stocks. Some countries have stock markets, some don't have much in the way of that. But if you can get a residence permit or a citizenship that gives you a place to go if things in the US get difficult, let's say, I don't know, who knows what could happen, who knows what black swan event could happen next, but if you have that residence permit or citizenship that comes from, hey, put 100 grand, put 500 grand, put whatever amount of money into some investment in some other country that's more detached. We published our new luxury living video, Live Like a King in Oman. I want you to go, if you like our channel, I want you to go and watch Live Like a King in Oman. I think Oman is relatively detached from what's happening. Very highly livable place. You put your money into some different investment in Oman, and I think that's going to be detached from the economy that you're used to right now. You get a residence permit to a very tax-friendly country. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Let's talk about the second part, and this is the global reputation that comes from having a U.S. passport, what that allows you to do as an investor, what that allows you to do to ensure you have freedom. I remember, as an old-school libertarian, watching Ron Paul run for president, I think in 2012, and he was talking about border walls. He said, walls can be used to keep people in too. And as I look at talk of tariffs, I wonder how much you could isolate the U.S. economy to where other countries would just say, you know what, we don't want American money anymore. Now, is that going to happen tomorrow? No. But I've been here for 12 years. And when I first started telling people in 2012, 2013, like Americans should get a second passport, I was roundly laughed at. Now, it's become a big thing. A lot of Americans want to have a second passport. And many of the people in the business laughing at me are opening offices in New York and Miami. So a lot can happen in 12 years. And what I think is a lot more countries you're seeing are pushing back on the U.S. I mean, you look at what Justin Trudeau. Now, listen, Justin Trudeau might as well, when he leaves, he might as well be the chief marketing officer of Nomad Capitalist. We're going to try and hire Justin when Justin's out of office because, I mean, Justin Trudeau has obviously done a terrible job in Canada. Nobody likes Justin Trudeau. A lot of Canadians have come to us for help because they're just tired of the high taxes. They're tired of what's happening in their country. And yet, you know what? He's like, hey, Canada was with you guys through a lot of big events, and this is what you do to us. Because what? You think that a little bit of fentanyl is coming across the border? By the way, can someone leave in the comments? I never understood how, if Americans are the one doing the drugs, why don't we blame them for doing the drugs that people then supply to meet market demand? Not saying I'm a believer in drugs, but why do we never talk about the people doing the drugs? Why is it always the Mexicans' fault or the Canadians' fault? Like, I genuinely don't understand. But you're seeing even some of the U.S.'s biggest allies push back. They're taking Tito's vodka out of stores in Ontario. And I understand there's a common refrain whenever you kind of talk to a lot of folks in the United States about how Canada's upset with you or Europe's upset with you. Good riddance. And I think that kind of shows the marketing that's been done. I've said for years the U.S. is the greatest marketing experiment, certainly in modern history, that they got so many people in line to not only historically want to move there, now I think that's going down, but to get their own citizens to say anyone who disagrees with a scintilla of their narrow worldview is just to hell with them. You know, like during that time back during the early days of the Iraq War, when France was like, yeah, should we do this? And, you know, that time the French were right. And Americans were like, no, we're renaming it Freedom Fries. Like, to hell with them. Like, this is like what 15-year-olds do. And so, to me, that's part of the American culture. And when people say, don't you feel better now that Trump's in office? Number one, not a U.S. citizen anymore. Don't care what happens, quite frankly. I mean, I'm just here with my popcorn, and I'm just here making these videos for those of you who might want to know my perspective being on the other side. To me, it's not about whether Trump's in power or Biden's in power. It's about this living, breathing American culture, part of which has the mentality of a teenager that says anyone who doesn't agree with what they're doing or anyone who pushes back is just, you know, to be rid of. You know, one thing I learned in therapy is like you got to set your boundaries. You have to have healthy boundaries. And then just because you set the boundaries doesn't mean that they follow it. You've got to enforce the boundary. That's all what Trump is doing. But then here's the second part of setting boundaries. The other person gets to have their own boundaries and their own preferences. Just because you set and enforce the boundary doesn't mean they fall to their knees and bow down to you. They're also allowed to have their own perspective. And so here's what I see, and I'm saying this, not as some left-wing guy. I have concerns about America first and that whole mantra because to me, what I've always interpreted as a former American being overseas, is we're going to say, here are our demands, here are our boundaries as the United States, and the rest of you have to fall to your knees. And if Justin Trudeau's like, we're a pretty significant world economy too, and we don't want to sell your products either, or we're going to, put, tariffs on your stuff. It's like, oh, they're nasty people. Listen, you set a boundary, they set a boundary. And what I think this is going to lead to is more and more people saying, wow, the U.S. isn't that investable. Is it going to crumble to nobody thinks that? Absolutely not. But let's be honest. What has positioned the U.S. to its strong position, it's not just that Americans have pretty good salaries overall and that they invest to some extent in their own economy. It's been driven by global use of the U.S. dollar and people from all around the world investing in the United States. And what have I told you for years? Economies run on the margins. You start losing 1% here and 1% there because people have less confidence. That's going to sting. And again, we can say, we don't need those rootin' tootin' Chinese people coming over here. Okay, great, fine. Don't have the Chinese people. That's great. You're going to take a little slice here and then a little slice there. As I sit here in Southeast Asia, Malaysia has turned from a country in my lifetime that was very strong, one of the greatest allies of the United States in Asia, to now 75% of the population. Some of the nicest people you'll ever meet. And you can come and see them at Nomad Capitalist Live. But some of the nicest people, 75%, prefer China over the U.S. They want to be sided with China. Why? Because they see the U.S. boundary and they say, okay, that seems a little strong. We'd rather go over here where China has a lower boundary because for us, Malaysia's first. Again, if we think that everyone's trying to come to the U.S. and everyone should fall at our knees, well then, why wouldn't they want America first too? Because they're Malaysians. Because they're whatever their country is and they want their country to be first. And I look at, now there's talk, and who knows, I understand some of this is negotiating bluster, but now there's talk of TikTok. The U.S. is going to start a sovereign wealth fund with what wealth? I mean, Peter Schiff says it shouldn't be the Department of the Treasury. It should be the Department of the Debt. What wealth do you have? You're 30, is it even 36 trillion? You can't even keep track anymore. But it's trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars in debt. And they're going to start a sovereign wealth fund the same way that countries with too much money do. And one of the investments could be to buy TikTok. The TikTok that they bullied and are going to bully basically out of existence in the U.S. unless they cave. Why would I want to start an international business and have an arm of that business in the United States if it gets big enough the government can take it? I mean, I'm sorry, but how is it any different from the post-Soviet country where, the president's, son comes in and says, that's a nice looking restaurant you got there. It'd be a shame if the road in front of it was ripped up and were to put you out of business for not selling it to us. How is it really that much different? Now, I know if you live in the United States, it's like, yeah, great marketing job. U.S. great. We're great people. We're the best. The French don't like anything we do. To hell with them. Don't even call them French fries anymore. Oh, they were right? Still to hell with them. If you look at it that way and everybody else is bad and China is terrible and everyone else is terrible and just you're the best, then I guess it doesn't matter. But if I'm TikTok, What I've heard is 1/6 of their revenue comes from the U.S. and certainly have fewer choices in the U.S. Now, you can be sanctioned Russia, and they have fewer choices now. And you know what? Life there isn't as bad as people might think under the sanctions, but is that really the way you want to live, sanctioned off from the rest of the world? I think there's some possibility that you inch closer towards that over the years, and that having a U.S. passport becomes toxic, the same way having a Russian passport is toxic, not only for some of the economic stuff, but for some of the geopolitical stuff, like wanting to come over and take over Greenland, for example. And so, Trump said he was against sanctions, and I said, you know what? I agree with Trump on that. I think the sanctions have gotten out of control. There aren't that many bad guys in the world that they're sanctioning a third of the planet in some fashion or form. But these are just basically sanctions in another way. Oh, we don't like your business? Oh, yeah, you're promoting something we don't like? We're just going to pass a law and take it. Why? Because we can. Again, you can have that boundary. You can have the boundary we're the biggest country in the world, and you can bully people into giving up their businesses. You can bully people to do other stuff. They get to start a boundary, and we are seeing BRICS. We're seeing the multipolarity we've talked about. We're seeing these things. The rest of the world is increasingly getting together. They are increasingly wealthy. Let's be honest. If it were the halcyon days of the U.S. economy, would Donald Trump have been elected? No. People, when things are going perfect, they want boring, they want the status quo, they don't want to ruffle feathers. When people are hurting, they say, bring in the wild man, bring in the guy who talks tough, bring in the guy who doesn't sound like a president. That's what we want, because our country's in trouble. And so, yeah, the U.S. is economically more weak than it has been. Global reserve currency share down double digits since the beginning of this century. Other countries moving in the right direction. And so we're shifting from tariffs to sanctions. Obama passed FATCA. Now banks don't want Americans. And by the way, those foreign banks are doing fine. I own many of their stocks, and I earn healthy dividend yields from them. And so if you're a U.S. citizen, your country is telegraphing being an ally doesn't matter. You're telling Canada, you're telling Mexico, both of your neighbors, you're telling some of the largest trading partners in the world, yeah, we don't care about you. Now you can say, hey, talk tough. And I'm not taking a position on tariffs themselves. Let me be clear on that. This is not about Trump, but it is about you as a U.S. citizen. Number one, if you work for Tito's Vodka, you just lost some people buying your product. Is everyone going to keep their job? I don't know. But extrapolate that at scale, not just to Canada, but to Mexico, to China, to all the countries that might become in league with China and might take similar positions. You're going to start shrinking the market for your products. That's going to have a domestic impact. No matter how many jobs you bring back to make stuff in the United States under these Trump policies, what if no one outside of the U.S. can consume your products? That's not going to be good for your country itself. But what you're saying is this is not a safe haven for wealth anymore. And to me, that's kind of the downfall of the empire. Now, hey, that doesn't bother me. I'm not a fan of empires. But if you are a citizen, you're benefiting everything from your visa-free travel, everything from where you can invest, reciprocal privileges to make investments or have certain accesses to places. What happens when those allies don't really care as much about you anymore, and some of this stuff is coming up for renewal? Oh, you yanked our free trade deal? Great, we're yanking this for your citizens. And so if you live in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and you never plan to leave Hattiesburg, Mississippi, sure, you may work for a company or you may own a company that sells stuff, and you may have a harder time as an American because the rest of us in the outside world may not want to or be able to buy your products because the place that we're living may make it more difficult as a result of these policies. That's not good for workers and business owners in the United States. But if you're a U.S. citizen who watches Nomad Capitalist and you're saying, you know what, I'd like to invest in other places, I'd like to have a second passport, I think that may become more difficult in the years to come. Maybe not tomorrow, but I've been sitting here telling you the same stuff for 12 years. A lot of people didn't believe me 12 years ago. We've got a lot more fans and acolytes now than we did back then. And I imagine 12 years from now, if this stuff continues, it is going to be less pleasant to be a U.S. citizen. Because what have I told you? When I go to my banks around the world and I say, hey, would you rather have a wealthy Indonesian or a wealthy American? They say, wealthy Indonesian every time, no baggage. Money's money, but we don't want the baggage. I'm going to be in Indonesia, filming Live Like a King Bali coming up with Miss Universe Indonesia. We'll ask about that and we'll report back. But this is where I think it's going. And whether Kamala would, I don't think Kamala would have been better. This is not left versus right. I'm simply saying, if you're a citizen, not only is this going to have an impact on the domestic economy, no matter where you are, But I think Americans will have fewer options abroad if this kind of stuff continues, because their reputation will get worse. Is it going to become at the level of Russia? I don't know. But, if you pull out of NATO and you piss off your neighbors and you cancel free trade deals, they're going to all go on and they're going to have their own boundaries and they're going to all build what they have. And the less they build with you, the less they're going to really need you. And so I think that, having things like a second passport now, having things like a second residence permit now are all good things to do. Again, maybe they'll resolve all this and everybody will be happy. Maybe it won't, be fixed, but nothing will happen for a while. But long term, I've always taken the position I want to have international diversification so that no one country can screw me. And I certainly don't want to be kept in by an economic border wall of the ilk that Ron Paul talked about. If you'd like our help diversifying outside the United States, whether it's a plan A and you want to move now, or you just want to get a plan B because there's some uncertainty and you think, hey, what's the next Black Swan event? I'm the long-suffering nomad who has traveled around, and we've met hundreds of great people we've vetted to help you accomplish the things that you want to accomplish. You don't have to go out and find 15 different people to help you. You can come and get it done all under one roof with us managing the process of your plan A or your plan B to protect yourself from being owned by just one country. It's nomadcapitalist.com/apply.